I think in the business, in the AI business, in ours, there's two factors. We're physically working with cattle, many times amongst them with employees out there. The other part is they spend a lot of miles in a year on farms, all of our field people. We had a time when we were quite high on our workman's comp, on whether it was just some things that happened. We also have the part with central livestock where you're working with cattle, where gates can swing, some of those things take place. We put in our organization a person that's really safety and wellness. He's really in charge of programs that we put in place to help educate our people. We've done things from driving safety. Everyone has to go through initially a new employee and periodically courses on that, how to handle liquid nitrogen properly, because it can burn if you don't do things right. And I think the other one is with cattle. And some on the cattle gets to be a little difficult because we can't always control how cattle are on a farm. Yes, we've had a few injuries with bulls, but not very, very few over the years, but it's been more on farms. One of our biggest things today is shoulder separation, and that's a repetitive action of actually the insemination of the cow, so we get some of that. So shoulder surgeries are not uncommon. They probably aren't as drastic as some others, I guess, but those, they're still workman's comp things that we deal with and try to avoid those. And we have exercises to keep some of those things stronger. And we worked on a number of things. In fact, our person, Jeff, who's in charge of that, we have worked with some large dairies that have had issues with OSHA and so forth. We have him go out there and help some of those. And that's our national account group of herds that we have him work with, and he'll work with others also on that. So it's an important part because it gets costly for an organization, and you want to keep that in line. And number one, you want to keep employees healthy.
Any other comments? Next question. Next question.
Maybe while somebody's coming up, I want to go back to one of the things that Mr. Rohde brought up, and that was land preservation for farmland. This is one of the failures of the system. Most people look at developers and think they're bad people because they buy up farmland and develop it. In the present scenarios, our engineers coming out of the university system do not understand land conservation. And I'm not talking conservation in the sense of how you manage your land when you're planting crops. I'm talking about the least use of land in order to accomplish the purpose necessary. Building a highway. No engineer ever thinks about how can I narrow up or how can I converge or how can I, unless you're going through a city, how can you squeeze it through a corridor? When it gets out into the open spaces, Katie bar the door. So the engineers need to be taught about land conservation. Another one is community planners. Community planners are famous for finding the location that allows them to lay in roads, highways, and sewers for industrial park development. It is not in reclaimed areas of the community. It is the area that's most conducive right outside the community to rebuild, and that's usually some farm. Or you have general local government decisions that are being made on a daily basis about a school. We're going to build a school. Where should we build it? Well, the subdivision's kind of on the edge of the town because that's where the last building is done. So let's put it right next to the subdivision, not towards the community, but away from the community. Again, another farm is absorbed for another use. And so there's this need for general understanding by those people who are planning on the use of land, how to accomplish the greatest purpose with the least disturbance of agricultural farmland.
Dean?
Dale Gallenberg, Dean of Cafes. First of all, with respect to the generation gap that was mentioned earlier, I'm going to challenge at least one of our students to get up and ask a question here. So my question, it was implied, although I don't think explicit in the comments, that to solve some of these issues through the university, collaboration and cooperation is something we need to do. So I would ask the question of the group, both the agency as well as the private company individuals, your thoughts on what collaboration and cooperation with the university would be like in helping address some of these issues.
Gary?
Your name's Gary. I'm out of this one.
Get to the microphone.
I think there's a lot of things that the university can do, and I'd have to think about this a little bit more maybe and over time, but a good example would be internships. It's been mentioned. And setting up internships and providing for internships and having students motivated to do some of those internships on their own in consultation with the faculty member or a staff member, it would be an important kind of initiative in collaboration to assist in developing some of the skills that are necessary for an individual to round out their education, is one example. And it could be international, it could be national, it could be a farm-type internship. Most of them are with business and industry, however. So I think there's some collaboration, communication that would be an important part of that. I'd have to think about this a little bit more.
We'll give you time.
What other kinds of things can do? I'll need some extra time. Maybe some others can comment on it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll go to Jerry and see what thoughts he might have.
Well, I would, echo Gary's comment. At Agribank, we do have several internship programs, and actually the programs themselves have become a bit more robust over the course of the last couple of years. And in terms of more traditional internships, which have generally been a program that starts when school concludes after, I'll date myself here if I use semesters, but after spring term and concludes when school starts up again. I currently have an intern in my program that started last February on a part-time basis, went full-time during the summer months, and is currently working 20 hours a week. And that program will conclude at graduation, his graduation next year. But we're overlapping that, so we're going to be adding an intern in January that will essentially partner with our current intern up until May, and then we'll start that program again. So we actually have a fairly robust internship program. I wanted to speak perhaps more on the issue of collaboration. And I think this topic has surfaced not only here at UW River Falls, but in other institutions, is trying to get around, if you will, or at least come to grips with private-public partnerships and the inference of what that means for a public institution. And I know that there are universities and colleges that have embraced that concept, others that have tended to avoid what they view as perhaps a conflict in terms of research or other types of programs when partnering with a private institution. I would offer and suggest that we need to rethink that, because I think that both the private sector as well as public education have a lot to offer one another. And it goes beyond, I think, just funding programs. I think there are attributes that the private sector brings, clearly attributes that education, public or otherwise, brings that have a good outcome, a more synergistic outcome. So I think there needs to be more thought put into the exact question that was asked here today, is how do we, and when I say we, private and public sector collaborate.
Okay, Paul.
Well, one thing, as I mentioned earlier, is funding, and as an example, chloride reduction in the dairy industry. There are many trade groups that would certainly participate in a study to reduce chlorides, but no one has really taken the initiative to move that forward. And I know I talked to Secretary Bransel on this, but we really are in a lack of funding, both on the university and on the regulatory side, to fund these projects. You know, we have a lot of talent and a lot of resources, and we need the collaboration to create, I don't know if you want to call them challenge grants or challenge programs, much like they've done for solar cars or solar energy. But we certainly have these problems within agriculture that that jointly can be worked together, but it really needs an effort of the state government, and particularly the university, to come together on what these programs are and then seek out the different partners that would help with it. I'll give you the ludicrousy of it, is that we can get chlorides to a 6% solution. Well, as soon as we call it a byproduct, the EPA now says that we have a toxic waste. I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. That raises the alarms and levels of what we have to do with it. In a university setting, you have different rules, and it's an experiment for you guys. If I do it, oh my God, you know, what kind of dangerous thing am I creating? Let alone the hypocrisy of if we discharge chlorides, then we're a bad polluter. But if you salt your road, and you know that's pretty high chlorides when they salt the roads, they need a 22% solution. So to me, there seems to be a marriage in there of how to take a product that's a waste and use it for the benefit of society, because guess what? I want my roads salted or chloride in the winter as well. But there just seems to be a huge disconnect of what's being forced on us for regulation and the possible solutions that are out there. And part of it is just lack of funding. And I know we have the desire to solve those environmental issues, but it's tough. It's a tough environment out there.
Tom, did you have something? And then I'll come to you, Ben.
Yeah, I think just the organization I work in, we have about 22 to 25 interns per year that work in different divisions. We had one that did a special project with our production department, Anna Jones, who is also a River Falls undergraduate. This year she'd worked 2 summers, and that's really set her on a project working with sperm recovery, so which affects conception on cows and so forth. We have people, we've changed our interns to try and give them a larger aspect of the organization rather than just hiring them for one job and coming in and so forth. I think the other thing, as far as working together, our organization has worked with probably land-grant colleges or some like River Falls, maybe in the past even more. I see Steve Kelm here, and part of his master's was part of it was research that was done through GenX. And I think some of those things today, we kind of get to this from a business standpoint, and many more so than ours, kind of some proprietary issues sometimes can get to be competitiveness, and it's sometimes a little more difficult to do that, but we still probably should look for more areas that we can do that, because it brings you in better employees and along the long run. So I think that's there's a lot of opportunity there, just kind of what direction you go.
Ben?
I guess one of the things that I would suggest, and this is a key question kind of to the afternoon, but one of the things I would suggest is if you don't have a guest speaker on your campus every other day of the year, you have missed a great opportunity. It doesn't have to be in the same class. Let me give you some examples. Microbiology labs, biology are working with all kinds of little bad bugs. You ought to have food processors in here offering to suggest to your students the kinds of bugs they are dealing with, how they approach it, and what they need from the new generation of scientists to help some of those kinds of issues. Environmental design. You did a great deal of work in order to generate a dairy farm here for an educational purpose. But design changes over time. You ought to have people who are interested in redesigning their own operations as a guest here to talk about some of the challenges they're facing and asking students to help them solve those challenges. as an outside extracurricular class project. Business planners in your egg business, they should be coming in and telling you what they're facing. What are the challenges of a dairy farm that is trying to source feed products that are fairly high in cost, and how do you go about advising them? Because some of you are going to be my advisor. You are going to tell me how to solve my problems. And so this gives you an opportunity to hear about what some of the current problems are. Those are the kinds of interactions that can then lead to a lot greater interest in the student's part to go to a particular location, if not only for a day visit or possibly a week visit, to get a feel of what that company is doing and what some of the opportunities might be for them, even before they enter into the internship program and projects.
And let me mention one that comes down to the individual. About 10 years ago, a couple of friends helped Gloria, my wife, and me establish a scholarship fund at the University of Illinois. That has grown so that every year now we award a $1,500 scholarship to 3 students. That's how individuals can collaborate with you to overcome some of the tuition funding challenges that we have. And all of us, adults who are well along in careers and professions, we were all helped, and it's time for us to help back. And I highly recommend working with the university to establish individual scholarship funds to help students who need that kind of money. Now, I'm thinking there's a student back there who has a question. Yeah. Okay, because the first person to do that gets an A+ in whatever course you want. I'll see that it happens, okay. But I just could tell that you had a question.
Okay.
Who are you?
My name is Sarah Bow, and I am majoring in agricultural education here. So, my question to you is, obviously all of you are very passionate about agriculture, and you all sort of touched on education for our consumers. So what sort of things are you doing personally, or for what you represent? What do they do as a resource, or etc., for things like me as a teacher trying to educate those consumers?
Okay, we'll start at the far end and come this way. Paul?
Well, we actually do quite a bit of community outreach, working in different organizations. You can't think of agriculture or even the processing end in an island anymore. I mean, we really do need to interact with our community. So I spend a fair bit of time working with the chamber and other groups within the community, and I rely on that community goodwill to support our business. And I'll give you a case in point. The creamery was built on approximately 2.6 acres. Normally you would need 80 acres for that size plant. Well, in order to do our latest expansion, we needed to enclose a creek, move 2 roads, move power station, so we had to move some power poles as well, and move a 4-inch main gas line. You need a community to do that. We really do. So we had to reach out to that community. So we've done quite a bit of that. And you can't do it alone. You have to have and develop a good team of people that go out and present that goodwill, whether it's at county fairs, in the classrooms, tours if you can. To be honest, I frown upon tours on high school or less, because little kids don't do well in cheese plants. They just don't. So, and we try to do tours for university and other groups. We do outreach to other businesses when they bring people in. Last international group we had was from Russia. We've hosted people from Spain. So you got to think a little globally and allow people into your environment just as much as going out into theirs.
Tom?
I think in our organization, sometimes it's a little more difficult because of kind of who, of course, our members are, the dairymen and so forth. We work through a couple different ways. We do a number of things through ag teachers and have things available, or college along that way. We do local things. with dairy brunch on the farm, that type of thing that our people are involved with and ahead of that. I think the other thing is we probably work more through organizations that we're a member of to be involved in those types of things. And sometimes our people involved, sometimes aren't, sometimes it's financial. But I think effectiveness, we have our people in local areas that do some, but it's really through those areas I think that we do the most as far as our organization.
Jerry?
Yeah, I would just offer a couple of things that come to mind. For point of reference, the institution I work at AgriBank, which is a member of the Farm Credit System, we have 180 employees, and if I dial back 25 years, the lion's share of those had direct production agriculture background, grew up on a farm, if you will. Today, I would offer that probably 75% of the employees at the bank did not grow up on a farm. So one of the challenges that we have as a lender to agriculture is to educate our staff, and we do that. We actually have a series that speaks to education of our employees. We actually do a commodity a month today. Today is actually October 9th, I believe it is Cheese Day. So if I were at the bank today, there'd be a 90-minute presentation for our staff to better understand where cheese comes from, for example. The other thing that I would offer is that even though we're a large cooperative bank, part of what we do is educating the general public, and none the least of which is our counterparts in New York City, Wall Street, for example. In the month of September, we sponsored AgriBank and one of the larger farm credit associations sponsored an educational tour, happened to be in Indiana and Kentucky, but we took investors to see a large commercial dairy, a relatively large commercial hog operation, a cooperative vegetable grower, as well as a sod production operation in those two states. And it's amazing, and maybe not amazing to the audience here in this room, but they had no idea. I mean, I'll just categorically state that they had no idea, and particularly as it relates to the more traditional production ag, and I'm going to date myself when I make this statement, but kids in a candy store, I mean, eyes as big as silver dollars when they see what is involved in production agriculture, both the technology as well as just where food comes from. And, you know, it was mentioned earlier when you consider, and I'm sure this statistic has changed, but 8 out of 10 of the population of this country live in the, I believe it's something like the 12 or 13 largest metropolitan areas. And by the way, Minneapolis-St. Paul is not one of those, nor is Milwaukee. I believe Chicago is. There's a huge challenge to educate people where food comes from.
Gary helped this ag teacher. Get the mic. I'm not going to tell you again.
All right, all right. 2 times an out or 3 times an out or something like that. Well, what I was going to say is, being retired, my advocacy at this stage of the game would be with individuals one-on-one, being an advocate for agriculture and for consumer activities that are beneficial for people who are consuming food. And it's a one-on-one conversation, and I still am involved in quite a few of those rather than in any particular organizational structure at this stage of the game.
Ben?
Well, you're probably well aware that 15 positions went unfilled this year in the...
Get on the mic, sir.
15 positions went unfilled in the ag classroom, so there's a great deal of opportunity for you out in the workplace. We have 5 employees in our department specifically focused on communications. Each one has a different area of interest, whether it's food safety, animal health, in consumer protection or wherever, and we send out press releases, multi-press releases every week. Some get picked up and some don't. One of the things that we also started doing is we have 518 employees. Each one has a very specific responsibility and a duty to the public. And we started highlighting those employees one at a time, telling them, what does Teresa Ingalls do for the buy local community? What is it that she can offer, and what does buy local mean? We have others in other areas, and so we've tried to start highlighting some of our employees so that people know the resource to go to get better and more complete information. And that's what we've attempted to do in the agency.
And I'm the luckiest one up here. I've got a 50,000 watt radio transmitter. And 16 times a day I'm on the air in WGN Chicago, and I'm informing farmers and educating non-farmers, plus a weekly 1-hour television show. So I have a lot of opportunity. But I go back to what Gary said, one-on-one, still the best form of communications. At the coffee hour at church, at the rural coffee shop, that's where you do it, and that's where you get it done. And God bless you for being a VOAG teacher. If you read my book, you'll see that beside my parents, my VOAG teacher did more to change my life than anybody. Dean, I'm looking at 3 o'clock. What time am I supposed? I've got one more question, and I want to take it, but how much time have I got?
If we could make this the last question, then we'll close.
Okay, last question, and then we'll close. And you are?
Dan.
Dan?
Yep.
You don't have a last name?
Ehrenberg.
Okay.
You all stress the importance of food safety, food management, auditing, and the need for food technology. How do you feel about the college dropping the food science major?
What? What happened? Who wants to tackle?
I'll start with that one because
Okay.
I was not very happy at all, and we had a couple discussions with the university on that one, and I understand their position, and it goes back to in my opinion, some funding issues. I'm not happy with it at all, because when you look at the amount of food being manufactured within an hour and a half to 2 hours from this university, it's astronomical. And to not have that program here in the state, I know they're doing the best with what they have, but again, we have some very difficult challenges with our budget and how we go forward, but not happy with it at all.
Well, anybody here want to comment? Then it sounds like, Dean, you're going to have to talk here a little bit. But anyway, Ben?
We all deal with budget challenges, and we have to prioritize. And I don't know the circumstance, so I'm not going to talk specifically to it. But I do know that when I talk to the rest of the world, and we talk about what it is they're looking from the U.S., it is food. And why is it food? Because it's safe. You go to Vietnam and you ask them, do you want to buy milk powder? Oh, absolutely. Do you want to buy it from China right next door and it's cheap, or the U.S.? No, we want U.S. because of food safety. You go to China and ask them, do you want to buy Chinese cheese or U.S. cheese? And it's U.S. cheese because they trust the U.S. food safety protocols. I don't know the structure of the program. What I do know is our meat inspection team that we have in our department, which we have many. The majority of the meat inspectors that I have going into 275 private meat companies are River Falls grads. So I'm not sure of how extensive the program is, or how extensive it's being cut, or how it's going to be managed. All I'm going to say is, from our vantage point, food safety is a very, very, very important part of our responsibilities.
Okay, Dean. Didn't know I was going to put you on the spot, but here you are.
I don't feel put on the spot, quite frankly. It is a large and complex issue. It's one that certainly, in certain circles, had some polarization. We understand not everybody agrees with the decision that was made. Fundamentally, we closed down, we suspended a food science and technology program. Paul, I understand, has voiced his concerns with our decision to do that, but he's also been part of conversations where we've indicated we are developing and bringing back a food technology and food processing minor, an emphasis on the technology and processing side, because we were having problems meeting our obligations on the food science side. And we draw a distinction between those two entities. We understand there is a market for food scientists in the region. We understand there is a greater market, there's a greater need for capacity in food technology and food processing, and that's what we've chosen to emphasize, chosen to develop. We are not going to remove the word food from the college name. We do not feel like we're abandoning food science and technology capacity on this campus. It was a budgetary decision in part, given a limited set of resources and our continued emphasis on quality.